Welcome back to Season 8 of Talking with Traders. This is the fourth year of this podcast since it began in 2020. Once again, IG Markets have come on board as the sponsor of this podcast. We're truly grateful and privileged to have such a global leader in CFD trading as our sponsors. In the coming weeks, I'll be interviewing various guests from around the globe on the topic of trading. Some of these will be past guests that we invite back onto the podcast, and some will be new guests. The idea is to attract a broad spectrum of different perspectives from players in different areas of the markets. None of what you hear here is financial advice, but it is intended to get you thinking about how you might be able to apply what you hear here to your own trading and investing. Remember to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app. That way, you'll be notified when new episodes are released. Once again, thank you to IG Markets for sponsoring this podcast into its fourth year. And thank you, listeners, for your continued support of this podcast. Now let's get into this week's episode. Okay, we're going to go in 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to another episode of Talking with Traders. And this week, it is an absolute delight to welcome back a previous guest to the podcast, someone that the listeners absolutely loved listening to last time. His name is Stephen Goldstein, so no stranger to this Talking with Traders podcast. And Stephen, you've recently launched a new book, written a book and published it, this book, Mastering the Mental Game of Trading. And we're going to talk about that today. It's an absolutely brilliant book. I'm busy reading it right now, and I'm loving every minute of it. I think this is going to become a classic, I think, and one of those books that I put on the list of my books that I like to try and reread every year or so. So welcome back to the podcast. It's good to have you.
That's a pleasure to be back, and always great to talk to you, Garth.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And congratulations on the book. It really is very, very good, and it's very different to any other sort of trading books that I've read before. It touches on a number of the coaching sessions that we did. And just for the listeners who perhaps don't know this, but I was a delegate on your high performance trading program, or your high performance trader coaching program in, I think it was 2022, 21, 22, that sort of time. We were chatting monthly for around about 18 months. We were speaking on a fairly regular basis and going through the program, and it was absolutely fantastic, definitely beneficial to my own trading, and interesting to go through the book and find, it reminds me, it's a refresher of some of the stuff that we did on the coaching program. So it's good and well done. I mean, it must have taken you quite a long time to write this book, right?
Well, it's an interesting one because, someone asked me that and I said, yeah, it's taken me nearly 40 years. That's because my entire trading career and my entire career as a coach has gone into it. But the actual book itself, I thought about for many years. And then I was approached about doing it about 7 years ago by a publisher who liked some of the themes that I talked about when he'd seen my writing. And then it was only really during COVID, when suddenly there was a lot of time on my hands, and I'm like, maybe I'll start working on this now. And that's when I got it. And it took about, I would say, probably about 18 months of planning, and then about a year to write.
Okay.
So it was mostly the planning that took most of the time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's very good, and congrats. I'm really enjoying it, as I say. And I know that the sales have been going quite well, I think, because I've been watching your tweets on Twitter, or on X as it is now. And I know you've been saying it's been at the number one seller in, I think, the finance section on Amazon for a couple of weeks, right?
Yeah, well, it's somewhere near the top. I mean, it's really strange because it's not my nature to sort of brag about things. I think us traders hate sort of bragging, and we generally like to stay humble. But my publisher's sort of been saying, "No, you've got to tweet all the time how it's doing. You've got to be on it on LinkedIn." And I've been sort of following their advice against my nature and sort of just pumping it out there.
Okay. All right. Well, it doesn't come across as braggy at all. It just comes across as, your book's doing well and it deserves to do well. So
Thank
good.
you.
We're going to talk a bit about the book on the podcast now and discuss a couple of things in it without giving away too much. Obviously, I think listeners to this podcast really should buy themselves a copy of the book and read it because it's just distilled wisdom like nothing else. But one of the aspects that I want to start with this discussion about is effectively, I'm going to just actually show the diagram on this page of the book. If viewers can see that on YouTube, and obviously if you're not watching on YouTube, you're listening to this on a podcast app, then of course you're not going to see what I just put up there. But essentially what it is, it's the performance process cycle, which is something that, obviously you and I worked on a lot during the coaching session.
Mm.
I really, really love this because it just takes you through, the life cycle of a trade and
Hmm.
the different stages that a trader needs to go through. Now I want to talk to you about each of these different stages, but to sort of set the scene, I suppose. Those of you who are watching the video will have seen the diagram, but those who are just listening to the audio, effectively it's a circular diagram.
Hmm.
Think of it a little bit like a compass or perhaps like a clock. And at the bottom, let's say 6 o'clock, you've got what's called reset. It's almost like your starting point of a trade. Then if you go up clockwise to 9 o'clock, you've got what is called a trigger
Hmm.
point. Then you go further around clockwise to the top. 12 o'clock, you get to the point where it's act. And then you go around the clockwise again to 3 o'clock, outcome. And then you continue down back to 6 o'clock, which is reset. So effectively, this is describing the process of a trade where you go from where you're not in a trade, you're in this reset position. Then you move up to trigger, what triggers a trade. Then you act, do the trade, and then you're waiting for the outcome. And once
Mm.
the outcome is complete, then there's a position, a point of having to let go, I suppose, and get back into that neutral position and reset. And in my mind, I kind of visualize this thing going round and round, almost like if you've ever done a time lapse photo on your iPhone. You see the little wheel going round and round and starts, and it starts again at the bottom and goes round and round. So I kind of think of it like that. Now that's the process that we're looking at in terms of
Yeah.
actual individual trades. Right. So I want to talk to you about each of the steps. I mean, we start with reset. So we're at a starting point. We're not in a position. We now are seeking out the market, looking for the next opportunity. Where does one's mindset really need to be, I guess, in that position before you're not in a trade? Let's just assume you're in cash. You're waiting for your next
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah. Well, you could think of it in many ways. You could think of it as starting your day before you walk in.
Yeah.
You could think of it as, you're managing a whole portfolio of trades and you want to get yourself in the right state
Mm,
at the beginning of the week or the beginning of the day. Or you can think about it as like one single trade or one single moment in the trade.
mm,
And if you think about it, you want to, before you do any trade, before you do anything, you want to be in the complete right mental state to succeed. You think of like a performer,
yeah.
okay? You're about to engage with the market. You have a process for engaging with the market. You have a process for finding value. You have a process for monetizing that value. If you come into that in the incorrect state, you're going to make that suboptimal the way you're going to do it. If you come in an optimal state, on the other hand, you're more likely to do it well. You're more likely to do a whole series of them well, or even a whole day or week of them well. It's like just being in the right state for trading.
Mm,
You come in with an open mind. If you come in with biases, if you come in with old beliefs, if you're holding on to an old view, or you're holding on to some sort of regret, or even some sort of, you know, overconfidence because you had a great outcome, you're going to come into the next trade suboptimal. I mean, just think of the trade like at this point, your trade is a blank sheet. Okay, you've got a blank sheet with no idea of what you're going to do on the market, on whatever happens in the market. You want to be ready to go. Okay, first of all, you want to be immersing yourself in the market. You have to be immersed.
mm,
Okay, and you have to sense the market. Okay, and you have to be up to date with the news, the price action, the stories, the narrative, what's driving markets, the sentiment. You want to be on top of all that. You don't just want to walk in and go, okay, let's just get long.
Yeah.
Why? Maybe you're holding an old belief that the market's just going up
Mm.
or down, whatever it is. You've come in and you've not gone into the market and gone, right, what's happening today? You've just gone in there and straight away you're corrupting your chances of success.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about an ideal state. To be in an ideal state, the use of the word ideal is rare, but you want to get as close to that as possible. If you
Yeah.
think about your trading on the 1st of January, normally,
Yeah.
you've had a couple of weeks off,
Mm.
you've closed down your books, you've reduced your risk. When you've had a good year or a bad year, your mind eases a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, you spend a couple of weeks with your friends, your family, just not really looking at the market, maybe half a glance every now and then. Okay, and then you walk in, Jan 1, and you're ready to go and you start doing everything. You don't just rush in there and put the first trade on. Normally, you would normally, just let's do a reread of the news, the information, what's driving markets. Let's resync.
Yeah.
Let's resync. Let's reconnect with the markets.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's give it a time for, the first trade to come along. And you don't have a view and you allow it to come to you. You're more likely to do well. You may not get the first trade right, but you may actually just get out of it well. You may, you put the right level of risk on, you manage the stop, you get out the stop. You might have a portfolio that's already running that you decide, to add to it, to hedge it. You're coming in ready for the trade. You haven't
Mm.
even taken the trade yet at this point.
Mm. Yeah.
You're getting yourself in the right state. You're asking the right questions of the market. You're practicing something which I call detached curiosity.
Yeah.
Now, that's a super skill of the very best traders. Okay. That's getting yourself present to the market. It's asking questions of what you're seeing and hearing, not just accepting it, not just saying, okay, this is going up, but what does that mean? We're on a bullish stance here,
Mm.
maybe. What does that mean for how I'm going to trade, how I'm going to engage with the market? Let's find out a little bit more. Let's ask questions about, let's go deep. That's detached curiosity. You don't hold a view, but you ask questions, and you see what comes back, and then you ask more questions. And that really allows you to go deep into the market and be prepared for whatever is coming your way next, whatever
Right.
the trigger is.
Yeah. Okay. So that's great. So, I mean, as you say, you come in, you're in the right state. You're sort of in a neutral state, I guess. And as you say, ready for that curiosity
Yeah.
to spot opportunities. The next step in this performance cycle is the trigger. So that's where what you've now spotted something in the market that meets your system and
Yeah.
tweaks your interest. And
Whatever it is, depends on your process, whatever your
yeah,
process is.
yeah, yeah,
So some people will be day traders, some people will be longer term traders, some will, have a convergent strategy or a divergent strategy. Some people will be managing a portfolio, that's got a certain direction to it, or, there are so many different types of trading. But the trigger is something that takes you into a deeper sense of, okay, I probably need to do something now.
right,
It could be a hedging need, it could be a need to close something out.
right,
Whatever it is, something has triggered you. Research, story, news, data, maybe just some reflection, maybe a comment from someone anything that has suddenly take you into a deeper sense of, you know, okay, something is happening here. The word I use at this point is sense making. We're trying to make sense of whatever it was that triggered us or whatever has been happening out there so that we can now build a story, a narrative. Maybe it's a trade idea. Maybe it's just a simple break of a level and that's your system. And it's let's go, let's buy, let's hit the F5 key. You might have a very simple trade process.
right.
Um, but generally, I think of sense making as, okay, what does this mean now? What is the story? What's the idea? What's the narrative? You've got that blank sheet of paper and you're starting to put some lines on it.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. You're starting to develop a story of what you want to do. And then we move forward with that story, even before we've traded yet, to now go, okay, how does that work with me as a trader? How does that work with my playbook
mm,
or playbooks?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Some people have multiple playbooks. Some people have a simple single playbook. That playbook usually exists in your mind. Some people will have a whole set of rules that are written down. Okay. Um, but it's now, does that match my playbook? So a very simple example. Let's just say that you've got a bullish scenario forming in the market that you're following. And let's say that you like to do I don't know, you look for a risk reward of 5 to 1 before entering the market.
Right.
So you look at the market, you look at the narrative, you look at the story, you make an assessment, and you go, okay, for me, that's got a 5 to 1 return. That possible trade.
Mm.
That's my playbook, and it fits with it. This is what I call playbook matching. It
Okay.
matches my playbook. Therefore, I'm now ready to move towards a trade. If you assess it's got a 3 to 1 probability, okay, then you go, okay, I'm not going to take it. It's just a very simple rule.
Mm.
I'm not saying you should have a 3 to 1 or a 5 to 1. I may have had when I traded a 5 to 1 rule in certain scenarios, if it was against the trend or against the momentum, but if it was perhaps with momentum, I might do an evens trade,
Right.
because I might go, okay, it's an evens trade, but it's got 5 times as much chance as going up 100 points as it does of going down 100 points. So for me, it was kind of a 5 to 1 trade. So but that's because it's word pro trade. So you're matching your playbook now. Does this sort of trade suit you as a trade? And then if it suits you as that sort of trade, you start planning for it. So you're still in the sense of the production. This is the second quadrant. It's
Yes.
called the production phase. This is where the trade is produced,
Mm.
or the hedge is produced, or the idea is produced. And it sounds like I'm talking about, this could be something which happens over days and weeks or hours. It could be something that happens in seconds. So,
Yes.
it's all in your head.
Yeah.
But it's the process of what you go through at this stage of, okay, that's what I want to do. This is the size I want to do. And again, depending on your process, um, um, so I was going to just close that down. Depending on your process, are you okay to cut that bit out?
Yeah, we'll edit that. That's
Okay.
fine. Yeah. Yeah.
So depending on your process, um, you start thinking, what you're going to do when you go into the trade. What's the plan for it? What's the contingencies for it? Where are you gonna exit if you're wrong? Where are you going to exit if you're right? That often goes into the planning part.
Yeah.
But also things like, where you're going to add. Will you add? Will you have an adding strategy?
Mm. Mm. Mm.
Okay. Or is it one of those strategies, and we can go back, I think we'll talk about this a bit later with house and player. Um, is it a strategy where you just are assessing the situation as you go along? You get long, you like the long story, you don't really have a target, but you will have some sort of getting out strategy at some point, and you'll
Yeah.
just work that out when you're in it. So
Mm.
it all depends, but at the moment you've got some sort of plan. It doesn't have to be a hard and fast plan.
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes they are, sometimes it's just, okay, this is what we intend to do when we get into the trade.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's the production phase.
Yeah.
And you haven't got the trade on yet.
No.
Okay. All right. But you've still got a lot of mental capital at this point. A
Yes.
big part of this process cycle is building and then maintaining mental capital, because this is the most important capital you can have. It's far more important than the physical capital
Mm.
of money.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm.
Both are important and you've got to preserve both. So at this point, you haven't eroded your mental capital. Ideally, you've built it up in the being phase and you're using it for the production of the trade.
Right. Okay.
And then we go over to the performance
Yeah.
quadrant,
So this is
third
the
quadrant.
the top of the clock. If we go past the act point, and we're now
Yeah.
in the point between act and outcome. This is like between 12 o'clock and 3 o'clock
Yeah.
on the cycle, right?
Yeah, the act point is where you actually decide to do something, or you might have decided to do nothing. That is an act in itself, because
Mhm.
that has consequences as well.
Right.
Once you've hit the trigger, okay, you'll either do something or you'll do nothing. Okay,
Yeah.
they both have consequences.
Mm.
The act takes us into the trade. Okay, and vast amounts of physical capital and mental capital are drained at this point.
Yeah.
when you go into the trade. If you do it badly, if you don't follow process, if you don't follow your plan. Okay. And then the way I like to talk about it is, it's a difference between walking on say a 4-inch beam 2 feet off the ground.
Yeah.
Okay, which is where you were planning what to do.
Yeah.
And then suddenly the ground disappearing, and now you're 200 feet above the ground.
Yeah.
You change
Yeah.
psychologically when you've got risk on.
Mm.
Okay, you become, in a way, a different person. It's like there's another version of you's taken over. Your ego becomes agitated, you become highly emotional, you become aware of danger, of threat. You can't become hyper aware of it. And you also become hyper aware of the opportunity. And so everything goes to extremes during this performance phase, that the bit from 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock. Okay. I like to think of it as a little bit like imagining that you as a young person learning to sing.
Right.
Okay. And now you're out on stage doing it for real in front of hundreds of people.
Yeah.
And the risk of your voice going, or you freezing, or you forgetting your words, even though you've practiced and practiced and practiced, okay, during the production phase,
yeah,
things get real out there. So even though no one's watching us, our mind acts as if we are being watched. We are actually watching ourselves.
Yeah.
We are judging ourselves. Okay. And that happens in this phase. And that's why so many of us struggle in the performance phase. I think everyone does to a degree. Okay.
Yeah.
Think that's why trading is so hard, because even if you have a plan, as Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan so they get punched in the face.
Yeah.
But you still need that plan. It's going to help you get through it better than you don't have one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. You can refer back to it.
Yes.
You can remind yourself of it, and you have a bigger plan for when you do fall flat. Okay.
Right.
So we're now in the performance phase. This is where it gets tricky. Our emotions, like we say, are out there. And then the final phase, the fourth quadrant, that's the letting go phase.
So this is now when you've had your outcome.
When you've got to an outcome.
Yeah. Be it win or loss.
Whatever happened in that phase, you get to the outcome. Now, if you don't go through the letting go phase, okay, and you don't engage with it properly, and you don't come back to reset, what's going to happen is you're going to go back and short circuit the cycle, and go straight back, missing out the next being phase and the next production phase, and you rush back into the trade.
Yeah.
And then you would do that again and again and repeat that behavior, which is suboptimal. So you're in a suboptimal, I call it the death spiral, where you're just repeating bad behaviors, bad practices over and over again.
Yeah.
Okay. That's why this fourth quadrant is so important, this letting go phase between, you'd be looking at sort of 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock.
Yes.
And what I've noticed over the years is the masters of trading, the very best traders, they are the guys who are best in the letting go phase. Right. And the guys and the guys and girls, if you want to use the phrase,
yes.
Through the letting go phase, they just, and it is so hard to do. It sounds like it's just something that's psychological, but it really is so difficult. What's happening in the performance phase is all your psychological capital, your mental capital, has been drained away through that experience. Okay. And as you become caught in that spiral, you become owned by the market, and you're doing everything the market wants you to do, which is everything that you shouldn't be doing.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And it's the only way out is to go through that letting go phase, which is to get closure on what's happened, to then review what's happened, to be compassionate to yourself in reviewing what's happened, to accept your vulnerability in that moment, and to then give yourself a break, learn from it, and then just let it go and move on and get back to the being phase.
Yeah. So then you get
That's where the superpower is.
Right. And then we're back to 6 o'clock, back to where we started, back to that reset phase, where, as you say, you want to try and get into that perfect state to be ready for the next
Yes.
trade, so
Yeah.
that you're doing it without any, as you say, any biases or carrying any regret from a past trade and all of that sort of thing.
Regret, guilt,
Yeah.
or overconfidence,
Yeah. Yeah.
that,
That could also
you had a
be.
great outcome and you're like, I'm the greatest, but actually you might have got lucky and you might have actually done everything really badly.
Yeah.
But then you sort of believe your own publicity,
Right. Yeah.
which
So
is
then
why
you're coming.
humility is so important in
Yeah.
this sort of being phase. And why traders love to develop humility.
Yeah, and that's funny that you say, well, funny, it's interesting that you say that. I mean, in my experience, also working with traders, and I know you obviously work with far bigger traders, more successful traders than in many respects than what I do. But the ones that I find are very successful are quite even keeled. It's not to say they don't have emotions, they do, but they seem to be more in control of their emotions, and they're quite even keeled. So they manage to do that. They do that letting go process well, get back to that being phase, as you refer to it, and be ready to take up the next trading opportunity, or to be available to the next opportunities without carrying too much baggage from the past.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to try and do that at the very best.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I want to also then talk about what you reference in the book as the behavioral gap. And this is an
Yeah.
interesting concept. Effectively, it's the behavioral gap is, in a nutshell, the difference between what you're capable of achieving and what you actually achieve in your trading.
Yeah.
And, the wider that gap, obviously, the more likely it is you're doing something wrong. Maybe you're not following this performance process cycle properly. You're not, you're doing a number of things wrong. And I guess the ideal is to try and narrow that behavioral gap as much as possible. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you can think of it as, we all learn a system, or we all learn a method for finding value. And then we all learn a strategy or set of strategies and tactics for how we monetize that value.
Mm,
Okay. And most of us, or most of the systems we use, have the potential to make a lot of money.
mm,
Okay. Um, and if you were to just paper trade them, you probably would make a lot of money
yeah.
because you have no emotion and no ego
Mm,
in that process.
yeah.
So you can think of it as like that top line on the graph is what you could make in theory.
Mm,
What you do make is often a lot less,
yeah.
and often it could be negative even.
Yes.
And that's because the difference, particularly in that performance phase, okay, when the trade is on, when that sort of 4-inch beam is raised to 200 feet,
Mm,
we won't follow that process. We get thrown off it. We don't do the things very well that we know we could do.
yeah.
And that gives you that performance gap or that behavioral gap.
Mm,
And that's what we're working to try and reduce, try and eliminate, to try and get closer to that potential.
mm,
So that's what the process is all about. Can we close that performance gap? Can we improve how we monetize the ideas we have, how we conduct ourselves during that period?
right.
Can we do what we say we theoretically could do?
Yeah.
That's the battle.
Yeah.
That's why in the book I say it's not the markets we conquer. Really, it's ourselves. We have the tools, we have the systems, we have the methods,
Yeah.
we have the strategies to win in the markets. It's just our inability to actually follow them and stay with them and put them on.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I want to read a section out of the book. Just go and find it. It's page 63 of the book because I really love this story. So, I mean, I'm going to read. It's probably going to take me a minute or two to read this, but this will
That's
give
okay.
it'll give the listeners an idea of the style of writing and the kind of things they can expect when they buy the book and read it. So here we go. Yomiko was an FX trader at a London bank. During a coaching session, she shared with me the details of a trade she had taken in the summer of 2014 and the frustration that it caused her. Yomiko had mentioned to her colleagues that she was bullish on the US dollar Japanese yen exchange rate and believed it could head higher from 102 to 120 yen to the dollar in the second half of the year. She decided to back her call, and in July, she bought $25 million of USD yen at 102 She held the position for a few weeks, the longest she had ever run a trade. By early September, the trade started moving in the right direction, hitting 105. Although Yumiko was in profit over $700,000 on the trade, her natural inclination was to actively trade in and out around volatile market events. She was a classic house approach spot FX trader. Running positions for long periods was not her forte. Ahead of that month's US non-farm payroll data release, she decided to book the profit she had on the USD yen at 105. With volatility increasing after the release of the non-farm payroll data, the USD yen started trending higher. Yumiko was now frustrated that she had booked her profit rather than sitting with the trade. As it moved higher still, she decided to fight this rally, which contradicted the long-term view she had expressed. She initially shorted the USD yen at 107. Within a couple of days, it was trading at 108, and she had to cut the short. Her attempts to short continued over the next few weeks, sometimes getting the timing right, but mostly losing money. Often, she would sell a rally, then be forced to buy it back again higher up. She never reinstated the long trade. The USD yen hit 120 in December, which was her target. Had Yumiko stayed with the trading plan she had, she would have made over $3.5 million on the trade. Instead, with all the failed attempts to trade around it, she had lost money. Worse still was the damage it did to her mindset, which caused her to cannibalize her normal trading approach and thus pass up many other short-term trading opportunities. Okay, so, I mean, it's just such an interesting passage, and I think many listeners will resonate with that and relate to that story where, you know, you can spot something in your being state and your analysis ultimately ends up being right, but you don't make money on the trade, or you even lose money, as was the case here. And that's that behavioral gap, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, there's a couple of things to talk about here. One is the behavioral gap, but there was also a point in there about the house approach to trading versus the player approach to trading, which I know we want to talk about as well. But I mean, this is a story that so many will resonate with, right? And I'm sure you've come across it at many of your clients as coaching clients. And I know I've experienced this similar story myself, and it's very frustrating. I mean, let's talk about what she was doing here. Essentially, was, I guess, not sticking to the type of approach that she was good at in her trading. There's the house approach, let's talk about that now. House approach versus player approach. Maybe you tell us, rather, because you wrote the book and you've written about it. But I mean, I can talk, but I'm interviewing you, Stephen. Let's talk about the difference quickly between house approach and player approach, and then relate it back to this particular story.
Okay, so I want to start with something first of all, actually.
Okay.
You know, we often get very confused what our job is as a trader. You know, we get into the idea of we get into kind of the analytical state where we try to predict the market. And then what happens is we then try to trade that prediction.
Mm.
Okay. And that's not often what our job is. Okay.
Mm.
Our job is to actually find a method or a strategy to make money from the ebbs and flows or the volatility and movement or the mispricing of markets. So you have to know which one you're doing. Okay. And Yumiko actually got confused between the two. Okay. But the challenge is made much harder because we are trying to do both all the time, but we don't often know what the job is.
Yeah.
You know, we don't even realize what the game we're playing is most of the time.
Mm.
You know, I was recently watching or started watching, I never finished it. I can't remember. It's the film, not The Big Short, the other one by the Liar Poker's guy.
Okay.
The one about baseball. Moneyball.
Moneyball, yes.
Yeah. So you've got to excuse my memory, listeners. It just tends to go quite often. So I was watching Moneyball, and there's this quote at the very beginning of it, which I missed on the probably four other occasions that I'd seen it. Okay, and it was I can't even I did make a note of it. But it was along the lines of, most of us, it was a baseball player who played the game for 25 years. I think I can't remember his name, but he said, most of us don't even know the game we're playing all of our life until many years later when we
Right.
look back on it.
Yeah.
So something along those lines. And that's the game that we're doing when we're trading. We just go out and we do it. So if we get back to this example, okay, she was confused between two different sides of the game of trading. So the analogy and the metaphor I'm going to bring in now is a metaphor around blackjack.
Okay.
So if you think of the game of blackjack, how do you play it? Okay. Now, most people are probably listening there and they go, well, you do this, 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 and this. You sit at the table, you get dealt a card, you look at the card, you know whether it's likely to win or not, and you place a bet on it.
Mm.
Okay. Um, Now, what if you're the other side of the table, though? What if you're the house? What if you're the dealer?
Yeah.
How do you play the game then? And it's a different game.
Mm.
Okay. You are playing in the same game against the other people, but you're not playing it in the same way. Okay. So if you're the dealer, you're playing on behalf of the house, the casino.
Right.
Okay. They've sat you in that seat. Okay. And your expectations from the game are very different to the expectations from the person opposite you. Even though the two of you are playing against each other, the game is rigged in the favor of the house.
Mm.
Okay. The house has a positive expectancy. Okay. I believe it's around about 2% in blackjack.
Mm. Yeah.
Okay? And it has to be that because the house isn't going to make the game unless they're rewarded for taking the risk
Yeah.
and the effort that goes into making the game. Running a casino is an expensive business.
Mm.
Okay. So to make the game for the players, they must get rewarded. And the structure of the game is set up such that, the player always plays first. They're more likely to bust first, which means the money then goes to the house. And that's where the house's edge comes from in blackjack. Um, Plus a few other things, but it's mostly that. That means if you're playing against the house, by the way, you on average have a negative 2% edge.
Yeah.
You have a negative expectancy. The house has a positive expectancy. Okay. So the dealer is playing for the house. Okay. And they have to play the house's system. They will be taught the system they have to play for the house. They don't take on every single player. They don't play against them, their view of what they think they have to play. They are told how they have to play the game and they follow that system, and that monetizes that 2% edge over time.
Right.
They will have losses, sometimes quite big losses, because they might play against a lucky player or a smart player.
Mm.
And that player could be playing with a lot of money on the table. But over time, they're going to aggregate a profit as long as they follow that system.
Mm.
The player on the other side, as we said, he has a negative or she has a negative expectancy of about 2%. Okay, so if they just play as they should, as they try to, even better players will still have a negative expectancy.
Mm.
There is one exception. Actually, there's two exceptions to that. One is to cheat in some way,
Yeah.
and the other way is to card count,
Yeah.
which casinos will often say it's cheating, but it's not. It just means that you're finding a way, a method that can tip the odds back in your favor so you can win.
Yeah.
Okay. And card counting it's quite easy to do in theory. It's very difficult to do in practice.
Mm.
And it's not just about trying to sort of, tote up the value of the cards after the deal to work out what's the shape of the remainder of the pack, which is what you're trying to do. It's then also betting more aggressively when you've worked out that you've got a favorable count. Okay, so you go large. You don't go all in because you still have to use the principles of money management.
Yeah.
But when you've suddenly got a count in your favor, you go large. Otherwise, you constantly play small when the edge is against you. You try and play smartly when the edge is against you to minimum any sort of slippage against you. But you will have slippage until you get a favorable setup.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's no guarantee you're going to win. That's why you use money management.
Yeah.
Just the odds are suddenly in your favor. Now, trading is the same. You're playing against the house.
Yeah.
Okay. You're playing against the market maker. The market maker has got an edge. It's very slim. It's very narrow. Most market makers pretend they haven't because they like to make out that it's as hard as possible. And in certain markets where it's really tight and commoditized, that edge has almost disappeared. So the sort of major foreign exchange markets and some of the major liquid commodity markets. But there is an edge being a market maker. So now if we take that back to trading, we can choose two approaches. We can choose to try and play a market maker style, which is what a lot of prop traders do in firms. They're adding value to the market in effect. Okay. They're market making and they're trying to generate the positive edge from being the market maker. They're trying to accumulate that edge. And it's a different style of trading. You've got to be in the market all the time. You've got to be constantly playing the game, long, short, in, out, very aggressive size. Now, you think about the casino, they're in the market all the time.
Yeah.
They want as much footfall as possible. They need as much footfall as possible because their costs are high.
Yeah.
They've got to clear their cost level. Okay. And that creates a very different game, a very different way of playing the game to the other side, where effectively you're using a strategy which is akin to card counting, which is not playing all the time, playing sporadically and loading up on your bets when you've got what you consider a favorable setup, a favorable situation, and where you can assess the likelihood of a win versus a loss. And then in those ones, you cut quickly when you're wrong. You get out straight away when you're wrong, but you run it when you're right. Hence, when you have that sort of player, which is the other side of the table, mindset, you try to run your profits and you cut your losses short. Ironically, on the house game, when you play that, you do the other one. Okay. You actually take your profits when you get them quite regularly.
Yeah.
Okay. Depending on the mathematical equation of your profits to losses. And generally, sometimes you let your profits run a little bit because you're playing a bit of a mean reversion game. Okay.
Right.
You're hoping that it comes back. So it's a completely different mindset. Now, what if we go back to this story, which you read at the very beginning of this article about Yumiko? She was caught between playing the two. She suddenly went to this call to call the market from 102 to 120 and try and play it like a player.
Yeah.
Her natural instincts were to play the house game. That's how she makes her money. She was doing the wrong strategy and playing the wrong game for her.
Yeah.
And even though she made the call right, that wasn't her game to play like that. Her game was to trade in and around the market. And we all do that in trading. I did it for many years.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know I was doing it. So you have to know, am I here to call the market or am I here to play the game? And you see a trade that I talk about all the way through the book when I'm explaining the framework of the process cycle. That's a great example of that trade. I had a big fundamental view that yields were going lower, and yet I made the money being the other way around on that trade. Okay.
Right.
All right. That trade was completely against my fundamental view. Okay. And it was actually when I actually tried to sort of marry the trade with a fundamental view, that's when I had the first bit of difficulty with that trade. And it doesn't mean don't have a fundamental view. You have to have a fundamental view of the market, I believe. You also have another way. You look at sentiment, you look at technicals, or you might be systematic. It's great to have an overall view of the money, but you have to know your game.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's the whole point about this. It's trading is not just trading. It's knowing what is the game of trading that I'm playing.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. And in the book you mentioned, I mean, the difference between this house approach, which is very much sort of small, well, it's taking small gains, banking quick profits, and being very active in the market, versus the player approach, which is somewhat less active, potentially taking longer term views, allowing trades to play out. You know, your ideally in the player approach, your winners should be bigger, a lot bigger than your losers. And whereas that when you're playing the house approach, you're going to have a lot of small winners, and and a lot of
Relatively
small
speaking.
losers, but but a couple of potentially sometimes some slightly bigger losers as well. So it's a very different style. But you also mentioned in the book that it's very difficult to actually operate a hybrid of these two, and that very few traders you've come across successfully manage to operate a hybrid between the player approach and the house approach. Yeah.
Yeah, in theory, it's very difficult to do it,
Yeah.
but I think there are some people who have managed to master it, but they've been doing it for many years.
Yeah, the experienced ones. Yeah.
Yeah, there are exceptions to it.
Mm.
But I like to believe that it's impossible to do I think everyone leans on one or the other,
Yeah.
but there's always exceptions. It's very hard to be pure to both of them.
Mm.
Okay, so as a trader, I was very much of the player approach. And by the way, I don't think either of them are superior or inferior. They're
Right.
just two different ways of playing the game. Okay. But I lean towards a player approach. That I was much more comfortable with that. I'd adopted that philosophy early in my career. So it's really important to know what your philosophy is to trading as well.
Yeah.
I adopted that philosophical approach early in my career. But I was doing it in a house approach business where they wanted everyone to be doing, or mostly to be doing, the house approach. Not that they used that terminology.
Yeah.
So it was a bit of a battle in my early years, and it was quite challenging. On the same thing, I did do the house approach on the side. And what I mean by that is when the player approach wasn't working, I still needed to be in the market. I still needed to be immersed in the market, incensed in the market, feel in the market. Okay, looking for trades. So I'd be using the house approach to be constantly in the market.
Right.
And I'd be trying to, in a way, not really, I'd like to have made money using it, but I just more or less, it kept me ready for when the player approach trades came. It gave me a sense of what was happening, a feel. And hopefully I wouldn't have been losing, or maybe I'd be making a bit of money whilst I was waiting for the big ones to come along.
Right.
Likewise, there's house approach traders I know who do see something big and they want to go after it, and they'll set a player approach trade. The problem is they get into a mess, a bit like Yumiko, is they then take their profit when they've got a lot on board. And I have worked with a few to kind of almost separate those trades out into a completely separate book.
Yeah.
They look at them at a different time and a different place. But it's just really hard to play both sides of the table together. Most people do play both sides of the table in their career. They usually start off trading a house style.
Right.
And then they move over to trade a player later in their career. Not everyone. Some people spend their whole career in the house style. Some of the best prop, traders in hedge funds, even partners in hedge funds, have just mastered the house style and absolutely smash it doing it that way.
Right.
And I have actually had people who do that, who sort of have said, I want to learn the player style, even though they don't use that language.
Yes.
So I want to learn a longer term style of trading. And I'm like, you've been doing it 30 years and you're a genius and you make a fortune doing the house approach.
Yeah.
Why would you want to change something that goes so deep into you?
Yeah.
You're only going to struggle and you'll be throwing away the goose that lays the golden egg.
Yeah.
And they abandon any ideas to sort of become a player, and they become even better at doing the house. And
Yeah.
so it's really getting to know which one you're doing and how to do it. Okay, the job isn't predicting the markets. The job is making money out of the markets.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and that's a big part of the philosophy in the book as well.
Absolutely, it is. All right, Steve. We've probably run out of time, I think, for the length that we've got for this podcast. So I'm going to wrap it up there. I think that we've covered quite a bit. And just to the listeners, I mean, and those watching it, you can see the book on your screen, and we'll put it in the artwork for the podcast as well. Mastering the Mental Game of Trading by Stephen Goldstein. Congratulations on the book. It's really, really good. It's different to anything else I've ever read. And as I say, this is one of the books that I think is going to become a book that I read many times during the rest of my trading career. So well done. And thanks, Stephen, for your time, for coming back onto Talking with Traders for the third time, actually.
It's great.
Yeah.
Listen, I love your podcast. I love your work you do, and I know you've got a great audience that's deeply engaged with it out there.
Yeah, thank you.
So it's an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. And likewise, I mean, listeners, you've got your own podcast, Stephen, the Alpha Mind podcast, which you do with Mark Randall. And if listeners to this podcast have not listened to yours, they should absolutely go and listen to your podcasts, because they're also fantastic and got some very,
especially
very
the
good
episode
guests.
with Garth McKenzie. Tell them to go and listen to that one.
That was about a year and a half ago. Yeah, so we've been guests on each other's podcasts, which is great. But yeah, Stephen, always respect your work and love your podcast as well. Thank you for coming on this one. And we'll catch up again soon.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Garth.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Talking with Traders, brought to you by IG, a world-leading CFD provider. We really are privileged to have such a leader in the field of online trading involved in this series. Please follow us on Facebook and engage with us there. And a reminder to make sure you subscribe to this series by clicking on the subscribe button on your favorite podcast app. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we'd also appreciate if you'd leave a review on the app too. Till next time.